I own myself. The same is true of every other person on the planet. You don't own me. Your politician masters don't own me. I have no obligation to obey the arbitrary garbage that they call law. And I have no obligation to put up with it when you unthinkingly come to be a thug to force the politician's will on me. Now, you probably got that badge and joined up, I don't care what level or what agency, thinking that you would be a force for law and order. And for that, I commend you. You thought you were doing the right thing. Turns out you were wrong. You're not the good guy. Your hat, your badge, your title, the law books, they don't make you the good guy. Because morality doesn't change just because politicians scribble something on paper. So Mr. and Mrs. DEA agent, IRS, ATF, CIA, DHS, TSA, the rest of them, you are the bad guys. And the future is going to look back, the people of the future are going to look back now, and they will recognize you as the bad guys. Just as we look back at Nazi Germany and everybody says, how on earth could those people have just followed those orders? The future is going to look back at you, Mr. and Mrs. Federal or state cop, and say, why on earth did they keep doing these things to innocent people just because they were told to? So you have two choices, Mr. and Mrs. Fascist. Either you can think for yourself now, figure out that you're the bad guy, and become the good guy, or until the end of time, history will remember you as a stupid, unthinking, evil thug. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Fascist, I want you to consider one thing when you're trying to decide who's the good guy. Do you see anybody here having shootouts and blowing stuff up, raiding people with their SWAT gear? We say things. We express ideas. You spy on us. You invade houses. You put on your SWAT team and act like fascists. Who do you think that kind of hints is the good guy here? We say words and you violently attack us for it. And you call us terrorists. Who do you actually think is the good guy? At what point are you going to think outside the box enough to realize that your profession can be described as initiating violence against innocent people because politicians told you to? You are not law enforcers, you are politician mercenaries, and that's all. Here's the scary part, Mr. and Mrs. Fascist. You know what I want to have happen to you? I want you to put down your badge and join humanity. Here's the ironic part. While you're out there doing your thuggery, the people here, we don't want to enforce our will on you. We don't want you to spend your money on things we want. We don't want to force you to make choices that we want you to make. We want you to be free. You're attacking us because we want you to be free. How messed up is that? And you have the chance to be free. Because you, with the badge and the gun, you are the only thing making us unfree. It's not the politicians. They're not kicking down people's doors. They're not enforcing their arbitrary, bogus lunacy. It's you with the guns and badges. If you do the right thing, the politicians have no power. We want you to be free. You want us to be enslaved. Now, in the future, people will look back and say, how could anybody have been so stupid, so insane, so irresponsible to work for the DEA, IRS, ATF, whatever? What are you going to tell them if you're still alive? Well, it was my job. Where have we heard that? Only under every evil regime in the history of the world has that been the excuse. Put down the badge. Get rid of the official title of authority. Start taking responsibility for your own actions. And we here will defend your freedom. What government does is start fights. What people here want is peaceful coexistence. Is that why you have to fear us and hate us and spy on us? Because we want peaceful coexistence? Look at yourself in the mirror. Can you really tell yourself that you're the good guy when you're spying on people who want to be left alone and want to leave other people alone. If that's who you view as evil, something is messed up in your head. Somebody asked themselves the question, who should sit on the throne? Who should wield the power of authority and government? I say the answer absolutely does not matter, because you got the question wrong. As long as the debate is over who will have the right to rule us and control us and extort us, the answer doesn't matter. And I annoyed a lot of Ron Paul supporters when I pointed this out during his campaign. And I said, on a practical level, if I had to be owned by another human being, I think Ron Paul would be a pretty nice master. He probably wouldn't whip me that hard. He'd probably let me be free almost all of the time. However, when a slave attempts to become owned by a nicer master, even if he succeeds, he is not 1 inch closer to freedom. There is a fundamental difference between having a nicer master and being a free human being. The problem is not that, and I say this all the time, the problem does not exist in Washington, D.C., and the solution is not doing something to that thing over there. And a lot of people assume, and for some anarchists, it's actually true. A lot of people assume that anarchists want to go take the government and make it not be there. And that's not what I want. I want people to stop hallucinating that the gang of crooks in D.C. has any right to do anything. Because if you look at, you brought up the mafia, nobody imagines they have the right to rule. And that hugely restricts the amount of violence they can do. Now, mostly the mafia makes its money off of government-created black markets. Prostitution, gambling, drugs, alcohol, and that was illegal. Because you can't run a gigantic extortion racket if your victims don't believe you have the right to do it and they have guns. Now, in the case of government, the problem is not that there's this big nasty gang. It's that the vast majority of the victims of this big nasty gang imagine an obligation to obey it because they imagine it to be authority. Nobody imagines mafia to be authority. They're big, they're scary, they have the ability to hurt people, the ability to scare people and take your stuff, but nobody thinks it's righteous and legitimate. Nobody calls them government. The problem with government is it's not an organizational tool. It is, by definition, an entity that is imagined to have the right to do things that mortals don't have the right to do, such as steal, and they call it taxation, such as initiating violence, and they call it law enforcement, such as committing murder, and they call it national defense. The problem is not that there's this gang over there and we need to fix that. The problem is that people are imagining the gang to have the right to do things that human beings don't have the right to do, such as initiate violence. And I would use the example when people say, oh my gosh, if there wasn't a government, some other big gang would spring up and beat us up. Imagine, put yourself in the position where, okay, you're the bad guy, and I'm going to give you about 100,000 people, only 2,000 of them are armed. It's your job to rob 100 million people of a huge chunk of what they earn every year. You only have 2,000 armed agents and then a bunch of paper pushers. How would you rob 100 million people? There is only one way you can do it. Call yourself government and dupe your victims into imagining that them handing over their money is paying their fair share for the good of society, and call your gang the IRS. But if the victims of the IRS stopped imagining law and authority and government to be real and just recognized it as a gang of thugs, they could ignore the IRS out of business overnight, because the victims outnumber the perpetrators a gazillion to one. It is only the belief in the legitimacy of the ruling class, the belief that we are obligated to obey it because it's authority. It has the right to rule, we have the obligation to obey. That belief is a lie, and that belief is the entire problem. And when that belief is gone, and sooner or later it will be, when that belief is gone, you don't have to do anything to government. You don't have to go abolish it. You don't have to go vote it out. You don't have to have a revolution. The people simply ignore it.
And we could, because we outnumber it and we outgun it by a huge margin. But most of the victims imagine an obligation to obey the gang of crooks in DC. When that changes, the world changes. Until then, revolutions don't do any good. You knock it over, we'll put up another one, because as long as people still believe that government can be legitimate, they'll bicker over who should sit on the throne and what kind of throne it should be, you know, parliament or a Congress or a king or whatever. But as long as they believe in authority, they will set up a new god. It will stomp on them and oppress them to varying degrees, and it'll happen over and over again. When people give up the belief that one man can ever have the right to rule another, it ends, and it ends forever.
Very much. I'm going to start with my usual disclaimer. A lot of people, when they put together a talk or an event, they start with the question, what can I say that people will like and will like to hear and can agree with and go rah, rah, rah. I do the exact opposite. I think, what can I say that will make people slightly uncomfortable and mess with their paradigms enough that they kind of feel a little bit like questioning everything. And there are lots and lots of things that most or all of us in this room could go rah, rah, rah about and agree, yay, freedom's good, and, you know, come up with a list of 8,000 things about the government that totally suck. But as fun as it may be to be among like-minded people and say the same things and agree and say, yeah, we're right, everybody else is wrong, we don't really learn anything from that. We only learn when we're up against a different opinion. So I'm intentionally going to try to push the comfort zone. And I do this no matter who I'm talking to. I try to find out the general attitude of the group and what they believe and what they care about, and then mess with their heads a little bit. And if you decide I'm wrong, the worst case scenario is you get better at arguing your position against me. But I'm going to skip all the zillions of things that we could easily agree about and go right to things that make people uncomfortable. Here's a question. What are you willing to do to fix the world? We had a nice list of it up here. I can tell you what most people are willing to do to fix the world. Most people are willing to point at somebody else and say, your belief system is stupid, and what you advocate is destructive and immoral, and you're ruining the world. That's pretty much what most people in the world ever do to try to fix the world. Now, I'm not against that. I do a whole lot of that myself, telling other people how their belief systems are bogus and destructive. However, if that's all anybody ever does, including whoever really is the problem, nothing gets fixed. So it's very important, however right we know we are, to regularly take a time out and re-examine our own assumptions and our own paradigms and our own belief systems to make sure that we are not accidentally getting something wrong. I'm going to suddenly fly into a tangent here. We just got a whole bunch of snow in Pennsylvania before I left on this trip. Our power was out for 4 days before I had to crawl out like a caveman and then drive to Arizona. And whenever it snows, there are some people in Pennsylvania who didn't grow up in Pennsylvania and don't know how to drive on snow and ice. And there's a particular road near where I live where everybody always flies into the ditch who doesn't know how to drive on ice. And my friend and I would, years ago, we would wait there knowing people are going to drive into that ditch, because they always do. And somebody will fly into the ditch and we'll say, okay, well, we're waiting here because we knew somebody would do that. We'll dig you out and we'll push this and push it. When we get you up on the road, do not hit the gas pedal. Whatever you do, don't hit the gas pedal. We get them up on the road, they hit the gas pedal, wheels spin, they slide sideways into the ditch. They are so used to thinking that the rules of a car are this. This tells it which way to go, and you have a go, and you have a stop, and that's it. 99% of the time, that's what you have. 1% of the time, you don't have a go pedal and a stop pedal. You have a spin around sideways pedal and a slide into a ditch pedal. But people get so stuck in their head that they will keep going into the ditch because they think, well, I'm aimed in the right direction. This makes me go forward. And it doesn't. It makes them slide into the ditch. If I ask this group or any group, liberal, conservative, moderate, people who don't even pay attention to politics, whatever, are you for freedom? Are you for truth and justice? Do you want the good guys to win? Every group will say yes. No group's going to say, no, we're the bad guys, because you need to have bad guys for the good guys to fight against. So we volunteer to be evil. Nobody says that. If you asked a group of actual terrorists, they would say, we are fighting for truth and justice. Because everybody inside their own head thinks that they're the good guy. Now, if everybody is the good guy and has good intentions, why do we have the results we have? If you go out in the street and say, the U.S. government as it is now, is this what you wanted? Nobody will say yes. They may say, well, I kind of like this, it's not done that well, but I really don't like that. Well, why is it that you can't find anybody who wanted what we have now? They might want pieces of it and wish those pieces were different and complain about other pieces. It's because they're all drivers in the snow and don't really know how reality works. The person who drives into the ditch, he's not stupid. And he's not evil. He's not trying to drive into the ditch. He's trying to drive up the road. And all the people who have worked and tried and campaigned and petitioned and done everything they could, every form of activism you can imagine, and driven the car of the nation into the ditch of tyranny over and over and over again, they didn't want it to go there. The Democrats don't want it there. The Republicans don't want it there. Moderates don't want it there. Libertarians don't want it there. Constitutionalists don't want it there. Nobody wants it there, but it goes there every time. If you look at a chart of government power, whether you measure it by spending or employees, or since before there was a constitution, there were very well-meaning groups trying to fight for liberty. And the entire time, government power increased and liberty went down. And every once in a while there was a temporary bump, but the pattern always continues. So why do we keep sliding into the ditch? It isn't because we're evil. It's not because we're trying to have what we have. It's because human beings in general do not understand the physics of politics. Just like drivers who don't know how to drive in the snow don't get that the stop and go pedals don't do that when you're on ice. So the talks I did across the country, and then the one I did in Arizona, and then the little groups along the way, my overall theme for this trip has been forgetting the lie. And my main point is this. So many people talk as if we need some intricate solution. And if you listen to CNN or the evening news, you'll hear these talking heads babbling on using the biggest words they can find to try to sound very learned and stuff, which gives the impression to everybody watching, wow, you know, these problems are so twisted and convoluted that obviously the solutions are going to have to come from some real geniuses who are really creative and understand all this and really well informed. That is not anywhere near true. What it will take to fix society is not learning something new. I mean, I'm all for learning new stuff. But the majority of problems facing humanity can be solved by learning nothing new. Having human race have no more morality than it has now, no more education than it has now, no more intelligence than it has now, but by forgetting one lie. And one of the best illustrations I have of that is I did a few events called Escaping the Myth. And went through a whole bunch of things, and I would have different people from different backgrounds and different belief systems. Howdy. And tonight, since we don't have 2 days to do this, I want to cover a couple things, a couple little mental exercises that I did in those groups. One was, and I'll have you imagine it, though we don't have time to do the full version. Imagine that the people in this room were on a plane and it crashed into a big island. We're it. We're all there is. Now there are mountains and there are trees and there's freshwater streams, so we don't all die of thirst in the first 2 days. But we're it. We are the entire world. We have to figure out how to live and what to do and how to get along. And so the first few questions are, well, who thinks it would be a good idea for everyone to scatter, every man for himself? And I've yet to have anybody who thinks that's a good idea in any group of any, religious or political belief. They understand that no, people are a social creature and we work better when we organize and cooperate. Now there may be some people who are good enough at something that they don't need somebody's help for. But in general, we don't all just scatter for the hills. So, people don't want that. Number two, And for this, I have to make up another person on the island because I've never had anyone in the audience dumb enough to advocate this themselves. So I'm going to make up this fictional guy who says, well, here we are in this tough situation. I propose that we start by putting me in charge. I get to tell you all what to do, and I get to hurt anybody who disobeys me.
Well, one nice thing about Libertopia is you get to hear drastically different opinions. I could not disagree more. When somebody asks themselves the question, who should sit on the throne, who should wield the power of authority and government, I say the answer absolutely does not matter because you got the question wrong. As long as the debate is over who will have the right to rule us and control us and extort us, the answer doesn't matter. And I annoyed a lot of Ron Paul supporters when I pointed this out during his campaign, and I said, on a practical level, if I had to be owned by another human being, I think Ron Paul would be a pretty nice master. He probably wouldn't whip me that hard. He'd probably let me be free almost all of the time. However, when a slave attempts to become owned by a nicer master, even if he succeeds, he is not 1 inch closer to freedom. There is a fundamental difference between having a nicer master and being a free human being. There is no analog scale between totalitarianism and freedom. There is a scale between how nice your slave master is, and then there is the digital step over into you own yourself. A vote is never an inch towards freedom because what it says, what it implies before you even see the name, before you even press the button is, I acknowledge that this pseudo-religious ritual that we engage in actually bestows upon certain human beings the right to rule. That is the lie that has to go, and until that lie goes, the vote doesn't make any difference. And when that lie goes, no one will ever vote for government again. This is not a problem of what is in Washington, D.C. or the state capitals. The problem does not reside there. The solution does not reside there. The problem resides between 300 million sets of ears that actually imagine that documents and rituals and all sorts of hoity-toity garbage can actually bestow superhuman rights upon mortals. The right to tax, the right to legislate, the right to regulate. It can't. And when people understand that, they stop engaging in the ritual that legitimizes the notion that there can be a rightful ruling class. Don't legitimize the lie that it is possible for one human being to rule another rightfully. It isn't. And when you vote, you say, I believe in this game, I believe in the process, I believe I am a slave of the state, and I just hope to get a nice master. That should not be good enough for human beings. Thank you. Well, at least this forum, you get actual fundamental disagreements to debate about. Not only will there not always be a government, there has never been a government. Government is Santa Claus. Government is a hallucination in people's heads because they were taught to believe that magical rituals can bestow superhuman rights upon human beings. Again, Washington is not the problem. The problem is that people imagine a moral obligation to obey other human beings who wear the mask of government. Let me use the example of Ron Paul. I will say I totally agree with Michael that resistance is extremely important. Incidentally, I'm all for jury nullification because it's a fundamentally anarchistic action. It is walking up to authority and saying, I know you told us that this person should have done this, but, well, frankly, we don't care. that you said this person should have done this, we're letting him go. But imagine this. When you hear somebody say you have to participate, participate in what? Participate in running around in circles and doing magic chants. Imagine if instead of voting for Ron Paul, instead of campaigning, and I have no question about the sincerity and good intentions of all the people who did that, what if the millions of people who tried to elect Ron Paul and got absolutely nothing as a result, instead of voting said, "Dear IRS, we're not waiting around for the masters to repeal you, we're just not playing anymore." If 5 million people said, "We're not going to vote, we're not going to file, we're not going to pay, we're going to disobey you," you wouldn't need an election, you wouldn't even need a revolution. The act of voting shows that you're still stuck in the trap. You're still enslaved inside your own head because you still imagine that you need the permission of your masters to be free, that you're still going to beg the masters, "Please change your legislation and tell us we're allowed to be free." As long as you say that, you're not even free inside your own head. When you become free inside your own head, you don't talk to the masters anymore. You just freaking ignore them. I'll be really short because I've already said most of what I want to say. Vietnam. It happened for one reason. Americans are taught that authority is real. Lots and lots of Americans went to the other side of the world to try to murder people they knew nothing about because they believed in government. We wouldn't need an election if they were anarchists. Anarchists don't go commit murder because government tells them to. And as far as the idea of, oh, look how bad everything would be if we didn't have a government, pick any crime you want. Murder, assault, kidnapping, robbery, whatever. See how often it's done by private individuals. See how often it's done by people acting in the name of government. It won't even be close. I've learned the hard way that a lot of people really cannot grasp satire and sarcasm. So I'm going to start with the disclaimer here. When I was getting ready to do what I'm about to do, I had two main concerns. The first was that I thought some people might be truly offended who really don't need to be, who really shouldn't be. My second concern was that some people wouldn't be offended when they totally should be. We read now from the Gospel according to government, first book of Politicians, chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning there was chaos and mayhem, and people were as wild beasts, and there was great wailing and gnashing of teeth throughout the land. Then it came to pass that politicians came down out of heaven, shining in glory, and spoke unto the people, saying, "We are the Lord thy government, and we have decided to bless you with our presence, so that we may save you from your sins. Obey our commandments, pay tribute unto us, and salvation shall be yours. For without us, you are but stupid, violent animals, and only through our benevolent domination of you shall ye be transformed into a civilized and prosperous people." And the people wondered at the words of the politicians and were sorely afraid. But the politicians said unto them, "Fear not. If you will only blindly obey the God-called government and mindlessly comply with our every whim, then you shall be blessed. But any who disobey our commands, the heathens and criminals who think for themselves, being evil in our sight, shall be cast into prison and banished from the collectivist authoritarian paradise we shall create. So cast aside your individual judgment, your free will, your conscience, and your moral codes, and follow us, the high priests of government, without thought or question."
The foolish man builds his house upon consensus, cooperation, and voluntary interaction. But the wise man builds his house upon political promises, state coercion, and the lust for power. Free will, self-determination, and peaceful coexistence are the devil's work and lead only to fire and brimstone, suffering and torment. But blind obedience, unthinking loyalty, and unwavering subservience are the path to salvation. You have heard that it hath been said, love your neighbor and do unto others as you would have done unto you. But we, the politicians, say unto you, pray for the incarceration or extermination of those who are not like you. But pray also for your neighbors to be taxed and regulated. Pray for your friends to be controlled and enslaved. Devote your heart and soul to the rituals of politics, so that we, the high priests of government, may dominate all of mankind for its own good. Only then shall you have everlasting peace. We are the Lord thy government, and here are our commandments. Thou shalt have no other gods before government. Thou shalt follow no moral codes and no value systems above the arbitrary whims of the politicians. Thou shalt not take the name of government in vain or speak against us, the high priests of state. For those who do are sinners, criminals, and terrorists in our eyes, and shall be wiped from the face of the earth. Remember election day to keep it holy. Judge not the politicians or their mercenaries, lest ye be put on the no-fly list. Honor thy congressman and thy senator, that their reign may be long upon the land which the Lord thy government has taken from thee. Thou shalt murder by voting for those who engage in perpetual warmongering. Thou shalt kill whenever government commands it. And the killing shall be called national defense, serving one's country and spreading democracy. No greater love hath a man than this, that a man will go halfway around the world to murder complete strangers because we told him to. Thou shalt steal by voting for your neighbors to be taxed, and thou shalt hate and persecute any who resist. Thou shalt covet thy neighbor's income, and his car, and his house, and everything that is thy neighbor's. Thou shalt beg the Lord thy government to take these things from thy neighbor, and give them unto thee. Verily we say unto you, it is greedy and selfish to keep what you have earned, but noble and virtuous to ask us to forcibly take what your neighbor has earned. Thou shalt bear false witness by calling thieves and robbers public servants, by calling usurpers and tyrants leaders and representatives, and by calling those who advocate liberty for all criminals and terrorists. Blessed are the blindly obedient, for the politicians shall reward them. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst after power, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the voters, for they shall legitimize tyranny and oppression. Blessed are the bankers, for they shall embezzle the earth. Blessed are the jackbooted thugs, for they shall get away with murder. Blessed are the corrupt in heart, for they shall receive power. Blessed are the warmongers, for they shall imagine themselves to be gods. Blessed are they who have persecuted the innocent for the politician's sake, for they shall be promoted. And cursed are the heathens and extremists who speak out against our tyranny, who encourage you to question authority, and who instruct you to disobey immoral commands. We, the politicians, say unto you, worship those who insult and exploit you. Bow to those who extort and oppress you, and vote for those who despitefully use you and persecute you. Here ends our reading from the first book of Politicians, from the Gospel according to Government. I'm very happy to be able to preach to this congregation because I sense that many of you need help, because I believe you are losing faith in the God called government. Now, at times, our wise and benevolent political masters, they test our faith to make sure we are true believers by doing things which to us may seem insane and immoral. But it is not our place to question. If we are good and pure, we will gladly pay and obey. If we don't like the wars, if we think there's something wrong with them taking our money and giving it to giant banks, or running Ponzi schemes, or fabricating crime, it is a testament to our faith that we will blindly, unthinkingly go along with this oppression to show our loyalty to the state. It is a sin to question the wisdom of our betters, the politicians. I think God has something to say about this. Thanks. The righteous among us will tolerate every indignity and humiliation and insult to show our faith in the state. And only heretics would ever suggest that the politicians that are in Washington are not our rightful lords and masters. Do not listen to such blasphemy. In fact, report it to the authorities whenever you hear it. Ask not what you can do to improve society. Ask how you can empower and enrich the parasitic ruling class so that they can create a totalitarian utopia for all of us. I hope these words will be of value to you. I hope you will apply these lessons to your life. So the next time a cop or a tax collector or a bureaucrat decide to butt into your life or boss you around or rob you or assault you or tase you, I hope you can find the strength to pathetically grovel and submit without question and blindly obey their every whim and cooperate with whatever injustice and hardship they wish to inflict upon you or anyone else, because that is the mark of a virtuous, noble citizen, and that is the path to salvation. Look how well it worked for the Russians and the Germans and the Chinese and the subjects of every other tyrannical regime in history. May we too find peace through warmongering, freedom through subservience, justice through violent aggression, and prosperity through universal enslavement. Here end our lessons. Blessed are those who blindly follow orders and do not think for themselves. Amen. Okay, I'm back. I regained my sanity. Now, what's really sad is what I just delivered is basically the message that we all got, with a few exceptions. We all got from our teachers, from our parents, from the media, and from the government. Now, it wasn't quite that direct or honest, but that is the underlying message, that obedience to the state is a virtue. What's even more sad is government is the religion that people really believe in. Of all the people who label themselves Christian, Jewish, Muslim, atheist, agnostic, whatever, the real religion of the vast majority of people in this country and the world is the worship of government. It's the God they bow to, it's the God they pray for blessings, and it's the God they obey. Where they go on Sunday morning is just window dressing. I want to give a few closing words as this Pork Fest winds down. To me, the beauty of Pork Fest is not that we're all the same, because we're not. It's not that we all care about the same things, because we don't. It's not that we all agree on everything, because we don't. We just have one thing in common, and that's that we believe in freedom. You know, the media and people out there, they like to talk about diversity, I've never seen any crowd anywhere with the diversity of Porkfest. We have rich and poor and everything in between, and Christians, Jews, Muslims, atheists, agnostics, some religions I haven't even heard of before. Men and women, old and young, all sorts of races. We have gun toters and pacifists, gay and straight, a whole bunch of different personalities, different interests, different priorities, different beliefs. And we do disagree on a lot of things, which is why we like to stand around discussing, even arguing. But we get along. What you don't see here is you don't see us robbing each other. You don't see us assaulting each other or attacking each other or threatening each other. You also don't see cops. Now, you may see a couple and not know it because apparently they think peaceful coexistence is such a horrible thing that they need to infiltrate it. Other than that, you don't see cops or authority or government, but we get along. So the last thing I want to say is a message not to the people here, but to everyone else on the planet, the rest of the world, knowing that hopefully this will make it to YouTube. Everyone else, you say you want world peace. You say you want freedom and justice and equality and security. You say you want peaceful coexistence. Well, guess what? We have all of that right here at Porkfest. So to the rest of the world, you say you want all those things, and I want you to have all those things. I want the whole world to be Porkfest. And it doesn't mean we all agree. It doesn't mean we see eye to eye on everything. We don't. We already don't, and we never will. That's just fine. We get along. To the rest of the world, if you really want those things, if you really want world peace, justice, freedom, you can have it. But I'll tell you the price. I'll tell you what it's going to cost you if you really want that. Give up the cult of statism and embrace humanity.